And I always say to people, like, yeah, it's a numbers game. So if you ever feel yourself in a lull, it's because you're just not, firstly, it's because you're probably not doing enough activity. And secondly, if you're doing a lot of activity, not getting a lot of action, maybe you need to tweak your what you're actually doing, how you're going about things.
Yep, it sure is a numbers game. And in this interview with Zion Ong, we get into the nitty-gritty of the numbers. The numbers always tell the full story in your business, and that's why my business is called Healthy Numbers. Every business needs healthy numbers. Welcome to So You Want to Start a Business, the podcast where we interview business owners, entrepreneurs, and other smart guests. This podcast will provide you with the tools, the insights, and lessons learnt from others who have walked the path before you, so you can hit the ground running at running your own business. As always, this show is brought to you by my book, So You Want to Start a Business, and you can grab an excerpt over at www.thestartupsteps.com. I'm your host, Ingrid Thompson, and it is my absolute pleasure to bring you these interviews, and I thank you for taking time in your day to spend time with us. Each and every guest has their own unique perspective on business, and today is no exception. Zion Ong has grown his business from just himself and then a business partner, and now has more than 40 people in his team. In this interview, he is really frank about his experience and his journey. This is an interview to pay attention to. You may even find yourself wanting to make some notes, or even pause and think about what he says. It's terrific, so settle in. Are you ready? Let's go. Let's take the next step to help you make your dream business a reality. Hello, and here we are today with Zion Ong. Hello, good afternoon, good morning, Zion.
Ingrid, how you going? Thanks for having me.
Great, welcome, and thanks so much for your time today. So let's start with, what is your business? What is the business that you are in?
Cool. So I have a digital marketing agency. So we help businesses get leads. We help build businesses' online brands. And I've had this for about 10 years now. And I started it from my bedroom. I built it all the way up to having now 42 staff. And yeah, absolutely love what we do.
That's fantastic. So 10 years ago, because my next question is when. So why did you start this business? 10 years ago, what drove you to make a start?
So I've always wanted to do business, even as a kid. And I remember one day, like I did business in university, but personally, I didn't really learn a lot from it. There wasn't really much hands-on learning. I wasn't really good academically. I hated looking at textbooks. And so what I did was I got into a grad program at the bank, and I did corporate banking for a couple of years. It was a good career path, but I absolutely hated it. And I remember one day sitting at my office cubicle desk, and I think I was like 22, 23 at the time. And I remember looking at one of my managers, and he just looked really depressed. Like he looked really sad. And he was talking to a client on the phone, and he was actually yawning at the same time. He didn't look very impressed with the conversation. And I remember looking at him thinking that is totally not inspiring. And I don't want to be 45 years old and in that position. That's not going to be me in 20 years. And so at that point I thought, yep, I've got to do my own thing. I don't know whether it's selling rubbish bins or selling pens or digital marketing, don't know what it is, but I'm going to start my own business. So at that point I thought, got to do it. And then I was on a plane with my brother, and he said, why don't you get into web design and online marketing? It seems to be a kind of like a trendy kind of field. And I thought, you know what? I think it's going to really take off in the next decade. So yeah, I knew nothing about coding, knew nothing about websites, knew nothing about online marketing really. And I just taught myself and hustled and started my own business. Yeah.
Fantastic. So the why, the what there is kind of wrapped up together. So what you wanted from the business, it sounds like the kind of freedom to do what you wanted to do and something interesting.
Yeah, like I do think I'm a creative person, and I think every entrepreneur or every business person has an element of creativity. Mm-hmm. And so, and I'm not trying to be pretentious when I say that, but, I just felt really restricted working for someone else. And look, some people love it. right? But for me, I didn't love it at all. And also working in a bank, like banks can be very compliance heavy, very restrictive, very tick a box. It wasn't my personality, wasn't my character. I do think I'm very creative by nature. And I wanted to do my own thing. So, you know, that was a big drive, just wanting to be able to be creative. I remember I was in the bank one day, and this is quite an interesting story. And I thought, oh, there's got to be a better way to do this spreadsheet. There was like this spreadsheet template which helped you to calculate some figures. And I remember thinking, man, like this is such a clunky spreadsheet. So whoever created it, like I wish I could just change it, improve it, and then let everyone else benefit from that. And so I spent a couple of hours just doing, you know, creating my own spreadsheet, and it worked a lot better, right? And then I remember submitting it to the manager at the time, and he's like, oh yeah, it's really good. It's a lot better, but I need to get approval with my manager. So then it went up a level, and then that manager said, oh, I need to get approval from another manager. It went up. And then they said, and then 2 months later, I went, what's going on with this? Can we just implement it so it's easier for everyone, including me? And then they said, oh, now we've got to bring it back to like the whole department and do a survey and see if they like it. And at that point, I just thought, this is just, I can't keep going like this. You know, if it was my own business, would have done it on the first day, would have fixed it and moved on. It's just that impracticality really, you know, upset me, to be honest.
I'm sure there's people listening. I'm sure there's people listening that can absolutely relate to that. And I'm sure we've all got one of those spreadsheet stories somewhere in our corporate world.
Yeah. I think everyone has at least one.
At least one. So Zion, let's move into the business. And when did you realise you were in business? When did it feel real? At what point was that?
Yeah, when I went full time, it felt real and scary and exciting all at the same time. And I went full time 2009, and it was scary and real all at the same time because my wife was pregnant with our first child. I'd just taken on my first second home mortgage. The global financial crisis was, you know, happened around that time. And I remember my dad even saying to me, he's like, don't do it, don't go into business, because he's a very traditional 9-to-5 guy. And he was worried for me because he cares about me. And so at that point, when I made the push to go full time and realized, wow, I've got to take a massive pay cut and I've got to generate sales very quickly to get cash into the business so that I can survive and support my, my, you know, wife and incoming baby. That's when it felt, wow, this is real. You know, it's not games anymore. It's not a hobby. It's not something on the side. So really the first day that I went full time was when it really all hit me at once. And I remember, even though it was exciting, and I did get some quick wins, I had a few kind of semi-panic attacks. Like I remember, you know, 1 a.m. at night, I'd wake up at 1 a.m. at night or 2 a.m. at night, and I'd just be thinking about the mortgage, thinking about incoming baby, thinking about, am I going to be able to do this? And not being able to sleep. And for a couple of months, I would wake up with these kind of like panic attacks. So yeah, it was an interesting time, but I don't regret it. Yeah.
Not at all. Not at all. And I think that moment where it goes from being a side hustle or an interest or something you're kind of toying with or experimenting with, and as you say, with double mortgages, people dependent on you, it's a huge, that's real. It becomes very real.
Yeah, really crazy.
Yeah. So Zion, how did you know that the business is viable? How do you know that customers wanted this internet, this website, this media? Because 10 years ago, you know, some of the things that exist today hadn't even really taken off, had they? How did you know people wanted this?
Yeah, well, I knew just from common sense, like looking around the industry. I like to look at people's behavior, and I like to look at my own behavior, and I like to look at my wife, because I look at her as like the ultimate consumer, because she's not interested in business. She'll do things and I'll just observe. And so, you know, back in those days, I just saw how everyone was just Googling everything. You know, you want to go to a restaurant, Google. You want to buy something, Google. You want a plumber, Google. So that was kind of the first hint as to what was to come. and what was happening. And then I saw kind of how social media was starting to take over, and I thought, geez, Arama, like there is a real demand for this already, and it's only going to get crazier. And I was right about it. So I think I picked an industry that was really good. Some of it was luck. And then I remember when we started getting some really good results from people, that's when it really hit me that, wow, this thing's here to stay. And for example, you know, like a client where, as an example, could be an accountant, right? And, you know, not getting anything from their website because the website's terrible and they're not on Google, making a few tweaks on the site, getting them up on Google, you know, within a 6-month period, bang, I start getting leads. And they're coming to me saying, wow, this is crazy. We've never gotten a lead from the website before. And all of a sudden, you know. So when we started getting results from people for our clients, that's when I thought, wow, this is here to stay. And it's only going to get crazier.
That's true. So it's very insightful to be able to see that 10 years ago. And there's still room for everybody now, isn't there? Because it just continues to get bigger and crazier, as you say. So those early days, the money, so how did you fund those early days? I mean, you had mortgages, you had to take a pay cut. Where, with specifically or not specifically, where did money come from? Or how did you fund yourself?
So fortunately, you know, I was in a business that didn't require a lot of capital because it's a service-based business. So, you know, we're selling time. And there's pros and cons to that. But certainly at the start of a business venture, if you're in a professional services industry, you don't have to put in a bunch of capital. So, you know, it was really just paying the $200 ASIC fee or whatever it was at the time to start the business, and then onboarding clients, getting a deposit, getting cash in, and then doing the work as you go, getting people to pay in milestones. So we didn't have to put up a lot of capital. But what we did have to do is we had to sell. And so I always say to people, like, you know, yes, you have to have a good product. Yes, you have to get your operations right. But if you're not selling, then you've already failed. So fortunately, we understood that from a very young age. And myself and my business partner, we just sold like crazy, you know. And we were good at selling, you know. Fortunately, we taught ourselves. We learned off YouTube. We learned off people. We invested in sales training. And I always say to people, sell. Yes, product needs to be good, but just get the cash in. Get the cash in.
So how do you find customers? So in terms of selling and that process of getting customers, where do they come from? Or in those early days, I guess there's two questions there, isn't there? There's the early days, and, you know, it's probably different now, but in those early days, where did those new customers come from?
So in the early days, like on the first day, what I did was I created a spreadsheet of every complementary business in around the area that I was in, which is Subiaco in Perth. So I created a spreadsheet of all the businesses that could complement mine and that mine could complement, not competitors. Like, for example, a copywriter or a traditional marketing agency or a PR agency. And I would cold call them and introduce myself, and I'd say, let's form a partnership. Can I meet you? And so out of, like, say, I think it was 80 businesses that I had on the spreadsheet, I think I managed to get coffees with 8 of them. And out of 8 of them, I managed to get 2 partnerships that were really good for me, you know, that were partners for a very long time, and we would cross refer. So that was the first thing I did to get business. And then what I would do is just, myself and my business partner, we always believe in multiple streams of income. So if you're too reliant on one thing, that's not good. So we would go to a lot of networking functions. I met up with a lot of people, especially early on. Even my family members, I'd meet them for a coffee and say, hey, do you know anyone? Or you were interested in something? Didn't really care. Friends, family, started with that, my inner circle, then expanded out. Networking functions, and also invested from very early on into our own SEO, into our own Google ranking for our own website. And so probably a couple of years after we started making that investment, we started getting some really good returns. So even to today, we still get leads that come because of our SEO. And then we also get, and these days I'm getting a lot from LinkedIn. So I've made a really big LinkedIn push the last year, which has been phenomenal. And I'm only going to ramp that up because I'm a big believer in social media. So you've really got all angles. and you want the 7 to 8 income streams. Oh, and the other thing is having advocates selling for us. It sounds really corny, but having like 4 or 5 partners that actually are out there that trust us, selling for us. And so, yeah, all those things really make sure we don't ever go into a lull where we can't survive. Yeah.
And those advocates, that that word of mouth referrals, people being your salespeople for you is really, really powerful, isn't it? Can I just go back to the numbers for just really quickly? So a spreadsheet that had 80 aligned businesses.
Yep.
You phoned them all. You got 8 coffee meetings. So that's 10%, which is pretty fantastic, really. And out of that, you got 2. So the 2 out of 80 is not a very big percentage. So I think for people listening, I think that's a very powerful. I mean, numbers tell a terrific story, don't they? And I think when you think about 80 phone calls and you end up with 2 people that you work with, and that would have taken a long period of time. It didn't just happen today. You didn't make 80 phone calls today, 2 coffee, 8 meetings tomorrow, and then 2, there's a time span for that as well, isn't there?
There is. And also, I mean, I did that very quickly, like the phone calls, but in terms of booking the coffee meetings, forming the relationship, getting the trust. So really, the first deal that came out of that was probably 4 months after I started the process. And that's probably the thing that people don't understand. It does take time. And the thing is, that wasn't the only thing I was doing. You can't put all your nest eggs into one basket. So I was networking, I was catching up with people, I was doing other cold calls. That was just one small part of the pie. It ended up giving me the biggest return, for that period of time. But I was doing a lot of activity. And I always say to people, like, it's a numbers game. So if you ever feel yourself in a lull, it's because you're just not. Firstly, it's because you're probably not doing enough activity. And secondly, if you're doing a lot of activity, not getting a lot of action, maybe you need to tweak your what you're actually doing, how you're going about things.
Yeah, no, I thank you for sharing those very specific numbers, because I think that's very powerful for people listening, thinking about getting started. They make a couple of phone calls and wonder why the money's not rolling in. So just talking about money and pricing, in the early days and now, what have you learned about setting a pricing strategy? Because that's one of the things that comes up over and over, is how, particularly for a service-based industry, how much do we charge? How do we know how much to charge? How did you figure out how much to charge? I'm more interested in the process than the actual dollars. So
the process was knowing roughly what other people were charging, and knowing where you stand in the market. For example, if you're, like the bigger guys who have bigger companies that have in-house staff, that have big brands under their belt, of course they're going to charge like 5 times what a smaller boutique agency will charge. A boutique agency will charge 5 times less. A solo entrepreneur might charge even less. So you've got to know. So we very quickly understood where we were in the market. When we first started, it was a 2-man band. So we knew we couldn't start at the bigger end of town. We knew that was our aspiration, but we knew we couldn't start there. So very quickly we knew where we stood. But we were also very good not to discount all the time or really underappreciate ourselves, because we knew we were good. And, we weren't afraid to say, look, this is the price. We're good. Do you want it or not? Like, let's not waste each other's time. So there's a kind of like very polite cockiness to the whole process, where you're very polite, you're very giving, you're not arrogant. Arrogance is a killer, but you're not timid. There's a fine line. So I think from very early on, we knew that we had to be confident. And that's the thing I see with a lot of new entrepreneurs and business people, even business people who've done it for years. It's like a lot of times there's this timidity that really shoots them in the foot, and they just keep discounting, and then they make nothing. On the flip side of that, you have the ones that are extremely arrogant. And I find this in the creative industry, that are like, no, you do my way or the highway, just no flexibility whatsoever, which is the flip side of things, which is also not good. So I'm not saying I'm perfect, but just trying to find that good balance is really important.
Yeah. And you might be asking, given that you've been in business for this length of time, how have you managed to put up your prices? Like at different times, obviously at the early stage, as you said, you were a two-man band. There was a particular price point for that. Now you've got a team of 42 people. You're an agency. What happens as you go through that journey and you've got more experience, you've got more costs, you want to start charging more? How do you manage that, Zion?
Yeah, so it's really so one thing that we really worked on, and this is more in the last 5 years, is understanding our own costs in the business, which is how much are we taking to build a website? How much are we taking to do SEO for someone or social media management? How many hours does it take? What's the cost of the staff member that's actually working on these services, right? And actually having spreadsheeting out these numbers and checking it every week and every month and going through it with a fine tooth comb. So, first of all, what is the actual hard cost, right? What is the profit margin you want to add to make up for that cost? And is what you're doing actually good in the market? Like you might be spending a lot of time on something and okay, sure enough, you think you should be charging for that, but is what you're producing really any good compared to what everyone else is doing, right? So every time we think, oh, you know what, we're pumping out some pretty average stuff, we straight away go into R&D mode and we make sure we're ahead of the game, right? So we've got to stay ahead in terms of the quality. So we're always looking to do better. And at the same time, we're always measuring our costs. So then that really gives us an idea of how much we can and should charge. And look, sometimes you might charge a bit of a discount because you know that you're going to get more out of it in the long term. So I do look at the long term as well. So yeah, so those are the three factors. Cost structure, is what you're doing actually good compared to others? And what was the other thing? The long-term relationship as well. Yeah.
And as you say, feel confident about asking for that price because that's what it is.
I think regardless, because you're never going to get it right 100% of the time. It's just being confident regardless. Like I think just being confident every day, every minute of the day, no matter what. When you're wrong, when you're right, when you don't know, just be confident. I'm a really big believer of that in business and in life. I'm always very optimistic. I'm always very confident. Not perfect. I'm a big believer in optimism and confidence. You have to be as an entrepreneur.
Oh, we'll keep those two for our, we've got a question coming up about that a bit later. So an exit strategy, have you thought about what happens? Does it end? Does it?
I mean, people ask me that all the time. And in the past, I've thought about that pretty seriously, but I always come back to what am I going to do? What am I going to do? When I was younger and things were really tough in the business, because you're burning so many hours and it's so tough. I did at one stage get into the trap of the grass is always greener. I should just flog it and, spend some time drinking martinis on a beach and then do something else. But I really think I'd get bored. I'll be perfectly honest. And I've come to the realization that life isn't about drinking a martini on the beach. I think we were created to do work and to be creative and to produce. I really think we are. And I've come to the realization that I really enjoy it. And if I'm having a bad week, that's just the week. That's not every single day for my life. And I find so much enjoyment in work that I don't know if I could ever sell the business, because I'd be like, I don't know, I'd just be at home and then I'd be thinking, what do I do next? Then I'd
be finding something else. You would.
Yeah, do I really want to start again? Like, even though you might have a big cash injection, you still got to start again in a way. So at the moment, I'm really happy running the business. I enjoy things that probably a lot of people don't enjoy. A lot of people that I talk to hate managing staff and they see it as a chore and all my staff whinge and blah, blah, blah. I enjoy dealing with staff. I enjoy, sometimes when staff get moody and you've got to deal with that and like some of the nitty gritty, I actually enjoy it. So I don't know if I could ever put it away.
That's okay. That sounds good. I get you totally. So let's look back. So people listening are people predominantly thinking about getting started in business and, maybe in those early stages. So what's something that you wish you had done differently at the beginning? Let's not talk about mistakes or failures, but is there something you wish you'd done a bit differently?
Yeah, there's a lot. There's heaps. And I'm just trying to remember some of the key ones. So I'm a big believer in working very fast every single day. You got to work fast, especially in the smaller details, and quickly move on. So that's something I learned very quickly on. But what I didn't learn quickly enough was being patient with bigger decisions. Like, for example, picking the right office, onboarding a staff member, business partners, like I think those bigger decisions, you need to really think about it, and you need to really list the pros and cons, and not rush into those things. So in the early days, we made a lot of bad decisions because we were just in a rush, and I don't know what it was whether it was stress or whether it was our personalities. A lot of it was personality because I like to just get things done. That set us, like, if I hadn't made those mistakes, then I would be a few years ahead by now. But, look, I don't, it's a learning experience, right?
Yeah,
but yeah,
totally. That's very insightful. Very, very insightful, because that was one of your key frustrations at the bank, was how long it took to make decisions, because your character and your desire is to make decisions quickly. And so that played out in your business. And yeah, that's a very, very insightful answer. Thank you for that. This is a slightly different question, but very similar. Is there something you wish you'd known at the start? So sort of some information that you could have had, or something that you didn't have at the beginning. It's kind of the same, but a little bit different. And maybe there isn't anything different.
Yeah, look, we have a board advisor now who's been really good for us. And I'm not saying that board advisors or mentors are for everyone, because they're not. But I do wish that I had found someone like him earlier on, because I felt like we were doing a lot by ourselves, and we had kind of surrounded ourselves with people around our age. And yes, we had clients that were older and things like that. But if I was able to find one or two or three older people, men or women, that were really good in business, been there, done that, and did something similar to our industry, I think that would have really helped. So we didn't have that for, probably the first 7 years of the business. 6 years. And we only kind of had that in the last kind of 4 to 5 years. I don't think that I think that's so valuable. I really think it. Yeah.
That's great. That's a terrific answer. Thank you. So maybe that's the answer to this next question. So apart from yourself and perhaps your business partner, who has been of the greatest assistance to you and to the business?
Yeah, there's been a few people. My dad's always been really helpful from a spiritual and kind of, and even a business point of view as well. So he's been really good for me. He's been a good support, especially when times were tough. I find my board advisor, really good. His name's Derek Gerard. He's been awesome for us, because he's about probably 7 years older than us. And he's been in the tech world for quite a while. He was in the tech world for quite a while. And not just that, he was also in the, he was also in consulting as well. So he understands tech, and he understands the service aspect of our business. So he was really able to help us with understanding our cost structures, and also understanding how to sell a tech product, how to bill your time, things like that, things that we wouldn't think about. He was able to talk to us about. And right now he owns an investment fund right now. So he invests in tech companies. So he understands how to pick good businesses and bad businesses in the tech world. So that whole world, that investment world and the tech kind of world, is pretty new to me. So, just gleaning from that knowledge is so good.
Yeah.
So I would say those two are really good. And also I learn a lot from podcasts, from stuff like this, and you've got a really good podcast, by the way. I've listened to some of your stuff. So podcasts, books, YouTube, people like Gary Vaynerchuk, who I don't know personally, but I've learned so much from. I'm a really big learner. Timothy Ferriss.
Yeah. That just learning and just absorbing everything wherever you can. Yeah.
Yeah.
So who gives you Who gives you good feedback, Zion? I mean, here you are, you're the head of a business with 40-something people and, obviously turning over reasonable amounts of money. And who gives you good feedback? Where do you get your feedback from?
Probably my wife is the biggest one. And sorry, I need to backtrack. My wife has probably been the best kind of mentor / support for me in a way, because she's very different from me. And a lot of her strengths are my weaknesses. So for example, when I started the business, I was very disorganized. I was always a disorganized person, because growing up, I didn't have a very structured kind of routine in my life. So she sorted me out. She helped me to become organized and things like that. So in terms of that question there, feedback, she's brutally honest, so
That's handy.
yeah, it's really handy. And she just won't hold back, and because she's got that, she does understand things from a very deep point of view. She's got that gift. She can say to me like, Zion, I think I sense that you've become arrogant the past 2 weeks. You actually have come into a state where you look down on your staff. You think you're better because you're a business owner, which is what happened recently. And it caught me off guard. I was like, oh my gosh. And I thought about it more, and I'm like, you're right. And she said, yeah, the way you talk about them is as if you're better. And of course that's going to affect your relationship with them. And then of course that's going to affect their productivity, because then they're going to feel bitter about it. And then they're going to be fearful, blah, blah, blah. And so even just little nuggets like that are just so important. And so she's not afraid to give me that feedback. So I think she is the number one for me in terms of feedback.
Yeah. And Zion, can I just say, it's fabulous that you're able to take something like that on board, that you trust each other, because that's the thing about feedback. Feedback has to come from somebody that you trust enough to know that what they're saying is for everybody's well-being or betterment, or it's for the good of all. It's not about just having a nitpick or picking out things. It's absolutely for the good of all. So 3 key characteristics that you think you have that make you successful. Now, you mentioned them earlier. Maybe they're the same ones, but what do you think? You talked about confidence. What are those characteristics that have made you successful?
Yeah, so I would say the number one, I've thought about this a lot, is, it is to do with confidence, but self-esteem is really important. And I didn't have a very high self-esteem growing up, because, I went to a school that was quite racist. I was like one of 5 Asians in a school of 1,000. I never felt like I fit in. My family was going through some stuff for a few years, personal stuff, growing up. And so I even though my parents were wonderful, and school really did kind of stuff me up, I felt, for a period of time. So my self-esteem was pretty low when I was in my teenage years, going into my probably 19, 20. And so what I did, I remember doing like a bit of a counseling session with my father, which was really good. And he said, look, I think you should really talk into the mirror every day. And so I actually took that on, and I talked into the mirror, and I just kept saying good things about myself, right? And within probably 6 months, I actually felt a lot better about myself. It actually worked, and it actually helped my career in the bank at the time, and then in business. And I did that for years. I would actually speak into the mirror like I was the most awesome thing alive. Obviously, you got to balance that out. You don't want to become arrogant. So number one, my self-esteem right now is so high, it's ridiculous. But at the same time, I try not to be arrogant. So I've got a good support around me that keeps me grounded. The second thing is, I feel that I'm really good at selling. And like I said before, if you can bring cash into the business, that's number one. And I really, I do think I'm flamboyant by nature, but I train myself. And I also train myself not to be full of CRAP. I train myself to actually try to always speak with the truth, no matter what, and not to over exaggerate things. So I really believe I'm good at selling. And I think that the last thing I'd say is resilience. So I don't know. I think I was born with good resilience, because even when I was going through all that stuff in high school or whatever, I always just felt like I needed to prove myself and stand up. Like I never wanted to be bullied and remain on the floor. I wasn't that person. So I think that's something that you are born with. It is something that you can build up for sure. I don't have the answer to how I got that, but I think resilience has always been a strength.
It's interesting you say that about the way you were treated at school, because sometimes that is part of building the resilience, the ability to be able to take things on and continue to walk on, to pick yourself up. I mean, that's part of how you develop it. It's like any muscle. I mean, it's like a muscle. You can lift more weight because you lift more weight. You can be more resilient because you have more things to be resilient about. Yeah. So
without a doubt.
Sugar, if you're a sugar plum fairy and you're always wrapped up in cotton wool, then you always need to be wrapped up in cotton wool. So, I think resilience builds itself. And I just love what you said about everything being tempered with not having arrogance around it, because I think arrogance is such an ugly quality in people. And
it's terrible.
There's a lot of business
people.
Probably
the worst. It's probably the worst. So I always try to check myself.
That's terrific. Okay, so what would you say? So people listening to this are people thinking about starting a business. So what would you say to someone? They come up to you and they say, Zion, look at what you've done. What would you say to them?
Yeah, so what I would say is a few things. I'd say, okay, if you want to be an entrepreneur, be self-aware. Is it for you? Are you romanticizing the idea? So first I'd say, are you actually good at it? Talk to some people around you, people that you trust, right? That have a brain, not just anyone, and ask them, do you think I have it in me? Do you think you see these skills? And you might be surprised with what they say, right? Talk to your partner if you have one. So that's number one. And then self-analyze. Am I actually good at this? Or do I just like the idea of getting into business, right? So if it ends up being a yes, the support around me is saying yes, I'm analyzing myself and I feel that yes, objectively I am good for it. Then the second thing I would say is whatever you're going to get into, make sure there's a market for it. And again, don't romanticize it. Emotion can be really, really bad. Emotion, when it's not tempered, can be really damaging. And I'm an emotional guy and I really suffered through this, right? So I would say test the market, validate it. Is the demand there? Do a survey, talk to people. If it's not there, think about something else. If that's a yes, then the next thing I would say is, okay, like I said before, you need to learn how to sell before you master your product even. So train yourself, invest in training, pay thousands of dollars if you have to for training. Go to YouTube and practice cold calling, practice presentations, practice public speaking, So those would be the first few things that I would say. And then the last thing I would say is expect it to be really, 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 really hard. As hard as keeping a marriage together even, if not harder. So I'd say expect it to be hard. Don't romanticize the process. And and if they succeed, well, awesome.
Yeah. And be clear about what that success is, because it's different things for different people, isn't it? There's people want to build something like you. There's others who want to have a lifestyle business, people who want to, use what they do and do it nice. Like there's such a spectrum of what success means. So, yeah.
Oh, that is so true. And also that's right. Like if you want to earn 30 grand a year and you're happy and that fits your goals, awesome. Do that. You just see too many people who they look at Zuckerberg, who's a billionaire, and they go, I want to be like that. But that's not for everyone. That's for the 0.00001%. Like you might be miserable on that journey to become him. So yeah, you're right. It depends on what you want.
Yeah. And he's had to work really, really, really hard to be
exactly.
To be a billionaire. Like billionaires don't just, unless somebody dies and leaves it to you, but billionaires don't just happen, do they? It comes from diligence and lots of other building blocks together. So Alan, thank you so much for your time today. Just before we go, is there anything else that I haven't covered, something you'd like to say before we wrap up?
No, only look at, I'd love for you guys to check out, I'm going to be interviewing Ingrid as well, but I'd love for you guys to check out my podcast. It's called AskAlyka, AskAlyka podcast. We talk about business, marketing and technology. People can ask us questions and we'll answer them. I also interview awesome, amazing business people like Ingrid. So yeah, check us out.
Thank you. And I would highly recommend, because if there's not at least one or two really good takeaways from every podcast episode of yours, then people aren't listening properly. So
thank you.
there's real nuggets of gold in every episode. So anyway, I thank you for your time today, and I really appreciate the thoughtfulness that's gone into the questions, and I know the audience does too.
Thanks. Ingrid.
Thanks for listening. How fantastic is Zion? Honestly, if I was looking for a job, I reckon I might just head over and find a job with Alyka. Zion oozes confidence, and as he said, it's something he has had to learn. He also makes the point about the flip side of confidence being arrogance, and as he says, there can be such a fine line. My huge thanks to Zion from this interview conversation. What have you learnt? What are you taking away? As always, you can find a full transcript of the podcast and all my other podcast transcriptions over at my website, healthynumbers.com.au, with links and show notes. Look out for me being interviewed by Zion in his podcast called AskAlyka. Before you go, there's some gifts I want to give you before you go back to dreaming about building your business. Do you crave some actionable steps to help you get started? Or someone that actually gets what it's like to actually start a business? Someone who knows what to do and when, so that you can get your business off the ground. Head over to my website, healthynumbers.com.au, where I have some free resources waiting for you. I look forward to sharing with you some of the things I've learned from 10 years of business experience working with hundreds of people just like you. You'll find my business checklist ready to download so you can avoid the common mistakes so many others make when starting a business. I use this same checklist with my clients and the feedback from them has been great. So I want to share it with you too. What are you waiting for? Jump onto my website, healthynumbers.com.au, download the checklist and start building that business of your dreams today. As we always say, ideas without action, well, that's just what they are, ideas. What action are you inspired to take today? Till the next time, thanks for listening.